this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. Everything is good over here. As before, when you live in Florida in the summer, it's hot and humid, and we go through this period of the afternoon thunderstorm. So, matter of fact, we might have one rolling in while we're doing the show. So, if you hear some weird noise, it might be that thunderstorm coming in. And then other times, it rolls on by. By the time it decides to come down, it's gone over us. But anyway, guys, let's get on to the good part. And the good part has to do with who the guest is here tonight. This is the first time this gentleman has been on Stories of the Supernatural. His name is Peter Baldwin Panagore. He's an ordained pastor, storyteller, communicator, and public speaker. He graduated from Yale University, where he completed his master's in divinity, focusing on the practices and writings in the classics of Western mysticism. He's a two-time near-death experiencer. He first died in 1980 of hypothermia while ice climbing in Banff Provincial Park in Canada, and then again of a heart attack in 2015. He served 18 years as a congregational, and community minister in New England in the United Church of Christ, specializing in death and dying and service to the poor and hurting. For 7 years, Peter sat on the state of Maine's domestic homicide review panel as a gubernatorial appointee. He lives in coastal Maine, where he enjoys his family, nature, books, gardening, writing, sailing, and skiing. He is the author of Heaven is Beautiful, 2 Minutes for God, and Stories from a Soldier's Heart. He also contributed a story to Chicken Soup for the Veteran Soul. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Peter?
Hey, thanks for having me, Marlene. It's very different weather up here in Maine than it is down there in Florida.
Yeah, one time I went up to, I think it's Point Elizabeth or something like that.
Cape Elizabeth.
Cape Elizabeth. Okay, that was it. And I remember we went 1 week, which we was sheer luck. We went 1 week before they closed down, because I think it was in October. They closed for the whole winter.
Yep.
And it was the best lobster rolls, by the way, I've ever had. But yes, I know. What can I say, right? It was very nice. It was very quaint. But yeah, you could tell that over there, we're not even staying open. That kind of deal.
Yeah, all winter. In the town I live in, most of the stores are closed through the winter.
Right.
With 1 or 2 restaurants open.
I can imagine, because what is it? It just gets too cold, or?
Well, we're a summer season, like you guys are winter season for all your tourists. We're a summer season place, but the coast of Maine is remote.
Yes.
By most people's standards. And so when the tourists leave, our town goes from about 45,000 down to about 4,000.
Oh boy. Okay. So everybody flees, in other words.
Yeah, there's a lot of summer homes here. It's very different in the summertime. It becomes very international. There's people from all over the world, and lots of different languages and colors of people and all this kind of stuff that we don't have in the wintertime. So it's really great in the summer to get a dose of culture.
Right, but then everybody just it gets, what is it, icy and
Well, it depends on where you live. It's a pretty big state. And so up in the mountains, you can get 10 feet of snow. But I live on the end of a peninsula, and on the end of the peninsula is a neck of land that is another peninsula that's small, narrower, and sticks
Mm-hmm.
further out into the ocean. And I live down at the point of this land. And so
Okay.
it can rain on where I live and snow a mile away. It can be icy where I live and have snow a mile away. It can be 65 degrees all week this past week in the fog, when 3 miles away it was 75 and sunny.
And it's the North Atlantic, which is where you're at as far
It
as,
is,
yeah,
cold water.
very all the time, right?
Yeah.
No, like I said, we went there and it was there in October. It was already cold.
Right.
And, they had a sign up, we're closing October. It was like right at the end of October. And we're like, huh?
Yep.
And then of course, they didn't open until the springtime. And it was, we realized later on that was across the board.
Yeah, that's the norm here. Wow.
So, and you've lived there a long time? You've lived in Maine a long time?
36 years, something like that.
All right. So you must like it. You must like it.
Yeah. I'm originally from outside of Boston, and
Mm-hmm.
we were kind of Cape Cod family, and when I came up to Maine, and it was community like I'd never experienced it.
Okay. I can imagine that must happen. As a matter of fact, the people that stay behind, everybody must be like, everybody knows everybody else.
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses to that, because you can one day somebody called me on the phone and said, "Hey, your broom's out front."
All right. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I moved from South Florida up to North Florida, and the little town I moved in has like 5,000 people. And I'm not there yet. I'm like a newcomer. But I've got a neighbor that's been here since '85, and other people, and they know everything about everybody. I mean, it's like the Daily Pulse, everything about everybody. And did you know? And then so whenever I call her up and I go, Sherry, hey, have you heard about? Oh yes, the unofficial newspaper. So I kind of understand what you mean as far as
like that.
Yeah, it's like stuff you want to know, and even more.
Yeah,
But,
and you have to be very careful about when you move into town. Everybody is warned that you never talk about anybody in town, because everybody is related to somebody.
Oh yeah, that. Plus, it's really funny because we live on acreage, so we barely have like 6 neighbors like around us,
Nice.
and it's really fun. But they were really nice at the beginning. But then when they got to know us a little bit better, everybody's trying, because that neighbor, he does, and everybody, they all get along, but they all kind of squeal on each other about all these little things, and we're like, oh. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're like, no, we're not going there. We're not going to.
I don't participate in that stuff either. I'm
Right.
like,
Right. But yeah.
la 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 la.
After we got to know each other, it was like, but they all came with their version of things. I was like, well, yeah, okay, I understand. But
Yep.
because everybody wants you on.
Be good to be warned of the dangerous people, though, because there are dangerous people, and it's good to know who
course.
they are. So
Of
that's a
course,
good
of
thing.
course. No,
Right.
that's one thing. But and of course, we all traded telephone numbers. And I remember, like, the first year I was here, I put these Halloween decorations that were hanging. I have like a little gazebo thing out in the front. It's one of those things that you hang and they float, but they're like human size. All they are is really cloth. And I have a neighbor, she's across the street, and she wears glasses, but I mean, she calls me up and she goes, Marlene, are you home? And I'm like, no, I'm not. She goes, there's these men in black suits standing in front of your house. I was like, what? I was like, I almost tore out of the grocery store. And I said, wait. I said, Leisha, wait a minute. What did you say? They look like men in black suits. I go, that's my Halloween decoration.
Well, she was looking out for you, though.
She was, though. But we laughed. I laughed. And when her husband came home, he laughed, because I understood. I would have appreciated it if there were really somebody in my yard in front of my house.
Of course.
But yeah, it was that kind of thing, like what you're saying about the broom. So I get it. But let me ask you something, Peter. You made that comment to me about before we started to record, and even besides what I said in your bio. What you're saying, you grew up in Boston, and what happened? What set you on this path, or did it come from family?
That's a very big question. I'll try to be brief about it. This path started when I was 5. I
Okay.
had an out of body experience where I was, in brief, an entity of light, an angel, but not the ones you see made of stone.
Okay.
Took me into a void out of my body and up itself, up a chute, up a silver cord, but it was itself into this void, and it became a transparent room.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a divine encounter and was sent back. I knew myself as a being of light and not a little boy. And then that's a brief version of it. When I was 6, I had my my dad accidentally ran over my puppy and killed it
Oh.
on a
Mm.
Saturday, and I carried it to the vet. And that night, uh, Ganesh came to me, but I was a Greek Orthodox Roman Catholic boy out of
Mm-hmm.
Boston, didn't know, nothing about Hinduism,
Right.
and it was had an experience of out of body wisdom and a look at infinity. And then when I was in high school, other things happened in college. This path is long. I've been
Let me ask you something. That first, because as a 5-year-old, that's pretty heavy. Were you sick? Was there anything that triggered it? Any event? It just happened?
I was sitting in our little maple tree in our front yard in the crook. I was
Mm-hmm.
5, it was an afternoon. I had morning kindergarten and I had the afternoon off, and I was kicked out of the
Right.
house. Not kicked out. My mom's like, "Don't you
Yeah.
come in the house? The baby's sleeping." So I was hiding in the maple tree, waiting for my 2 sisters to come back from parochial grammar school. They went to the local
Mm-hmm.
Catholic school, and I was going to jump down and scare them because I was that kind of kid. And but as I sat in the tree, and it was September, the leaves, the maple, sugar maple trees, when they're not beautifully reds and oranges, and they're two-tone green. So the top of the
Okay.
leaf is a different color than the bottom green of the leaf. And I was sitting in the
Okay.
tree, and the wind was blowing the leaves and flipping hundreds of leaves all around me, and they're all flipping like this. And as I watched them, I became mesmerized, and I drifted into myself. And when I was
Okay.
into myself, this roaring sound came from behind me, like a huge waterfall roar where you can't hear
Okay.
yourself. and
Right.
and it's right behind me, and then I became aware of its presence, and it entered into me, and it took me and lifted me out and sort of stretched me, and I could see the little boy in the tree, and I was inside this entity, and I was also could see myself. And I wasn't made of light, but I wasn't human. I was somehow, um, I was made, well, I guess a light being is the closest I can come to it, but I had the
Okay.
shape of a boy.
All right.
And when I was in this orb inside of this void, this orb was transparent, and it was an entity. It was intelligent, and it was capable, and it had essence to it and
Okay.
personhood somehow. And I was in this, and the 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 wall opened, and in poured the darkness, and the darkness poured inside this orb, and a counter went up, or a low wall
Mm-hmm.
went up between me and it began to change into 1,000 different forms. It just kept changing and changing and changing and changing colors and shapes and sizes and configurations and textures. It just kept changing and changing and changing, and it was speaking to me, showing me itself in its many forms. And then it pulled me out of
Okay.
this bubble and brought me into the void where I was immersed. I was separate from it. I had this same shape, but I was awash in wisdom. I was awash in um, compassion and knowledge, and and then I was brought back into the bubble, and the voice said to me, and this is all wordless. I'm saying it says things,
Okay.
and it's all metaphor. Okay, so none of this is. Yeah, I've constructed a language to talk about this thing that's not talkable, because I'm in a place
Okay.
of no matter. I don't have a brain. There's no molecules. There's nothing of those things. And so then it says to me, "Remember, you agreed before this life that you work for me. You work for me." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. I do. Yes, of course. And
Okay.
and down I went back into the little kid, and I was so excited. I jumped out of the tree and I ran across the yard thinking, I got to tell my mom. And I
Mm-hmm.
decided that the closest thing I had in my little tiny head was to be a priest, a Catholic or an Orthodox priest, a priest of some kind. And I
Okay.
went running into the house, and I got in trouble for going inside. And I tried to tell my mom, God talked to me. I'm going to work for God. Are you going to have to be a priest then? And priests don't have mothers or wives to iron their shirts, because she was ironing my dad's shirts for work. And you're going to have to learn to take care of yourself. And as punishment for coming in the house, you're going to have to dust the dining room and do it silently. And so I did do that. And I
Uh-huh.
learned at a very young age that got me in trouble. And
Okay.
so when this second event happened, I never told anybody. And then I for my whole life, I learned secrecy at a very young age. So I had this deep root in spirituality I was a natural born mystic. And then
Mm-hmm.
when I was 14, my sister ran away. And from our family point of view, she vanished.
Sure.
And it caused great emotional breakage in
Sure.
my mom and in my dad, and I couldn't stand being with my family anymore because it was too
How
much
old was
pain.
she when she did that?
18. She was old enough, but
You know, you know what? I know what you're saying, but for the actual act, that's got to be a difficult, very difficult
it
thing.
was like having a death in the family, but there's no
Hmm.
funeral. There's no
Yes.
body, there's no funeral. You don't know. You
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was, yeah, we were in Boston. She was at what was then Massachusetts Art, and this is the 70s, and so
Hmm.
it's it's Ram Dass, Albert Leary, and Timothy Leary, and I'll call him Ram Dass because I'm blanking on his name. Um, and so tune in, turn on, and drop out was the thing, and that's what she did.
Okay.
And we didn't know that. I didn't learn that until 1977. This was 1972. And so she came back in 77 for a month with a baby, having been
Okay.
raped twice, and then disappeared again.
Wow.
And without warning. And I was the kid. She was my confidant. She was my buddy. She was 4 years older than me. She was also my
Hmm.
tormentor. Okay, because she was my older sister, right? But she was also
Exactly.
my buddy, and it broke me pretty badly. And so
Sure.
when I was I tried to kill myself in high school as a result of all of this. It's much more complicated than I'm telling
Right.
you.
But let me ask you something with just out of curiosity, did everything what happened with your sister? Did she ever come back? Did she ever
Oh, it's a very complicated thing, but
Okay.
in the long run, she died
Mhm.
in 2007, I think it
Okay,
was,
I'm
or
sorry.
8. We thought she was murdered. There was this crazy everything about it was insane. And so the South Beach, Miami police called my parents, and the
Mhm.
police thought she had been murdered by her ex. And
Okay.
I had to fly down, and it turns out it wasn't murder. She had a heart attack, but
Oh,
there'd been a violent confrontation the night before,
okay.
so there was.
And then she had a
Yeah,
heart and the reason why I asked is that sometimes people do stupid stuff when they're young like that, and then they how can I say, they come back. In other words,
yeah,
sanity returns.
she didn't really ever come back.
Okay. All right.
She didn't. At the end of her life, and maybe 2006,
Mhm.
she was living in Florida, and my
Okay.
folks had a place in Florida because my
Uh-huh.
grandparents gave it to them. And the they met twice. One was on my parents were on the Gulf Coast. She was on the Atlantic, and my
Mhm.
parents made 2 trips for like a lunch,
Okay.
to begin this rapprochement, and it might have worked,
Mhm.
but it didn't.
I hate to say it, but sometimes the more time goes by, the more difficult it becomes in a sense, you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
sure, of course. It
Because
was
just things
horrible.
happen. Things
Yeah,
happened.
but so
So,
I went
yeah,
to
that
Montana.
must have been tough. That must have been tough.
Oh, it was, and it still, the ripples of the pond became waves, and the waves became storms, and they're still
Mhm.
crashing on the shores. It's crazy, but that's the way it is.
How about your other siblings? Was everything okay with them or
Uh, yeah, I'd rather not talk about them because they're
Oh, no,
living,
no, no. I'm just saying,
but everything was okay with them. And
I guess nothing. I mean, I've heard of stories, sometimes siblings or whatever, but nothing as bad as that this person, just like you said,
no,
technically they're alive, but it
no,
wasn't like
nothing
they
like
were.
that. Nothing like
Hmm.
that. And
Okay.
I'm the one who I'm the troublemaker other than my sister.
You are. Yeah, I could tell you have that troublemaker thing about you. I could
I
tell right away. Yeah.
do. You can kind of tell.
Yeah.
I'm that, yeah. So that's why I left my family. I was at UMass. Okay, what can I tell you? I can tell you that in high school, I got an appointment to Coast Guard Academy,
Okay.
and at the last minute, I turned it down because I
All
didn't
right.
realize it was all math. So my dad got me into UMass Amherst, and I ended up in the English department. And
Okay.
I loved literature, and and I'm dyslexic, and so I'm in the English department. My parents are like, "What are you going to do with that? You can't even read. You didn't even read till you're like in seventh grade." I'm like, "I just love it." And so I went out west to
Hmm.
Montana State University on a national student exchange, and
Okay.
I was taking English classes out there and some other classes too. But I didn't want to go back home. I went home in December for Christmas, and it was terrible. I worked all Christmas in construction, and
Hmm.
but my dad and I nearly got in a fist fight. It was just awful, but
Okay.
it wasn't he wasn't the one thinking about throwing the punch. I was, and
Okay.
I was like, it's just too much pain. And so, come spring break, I decided I'm definitely not going home.
Okay.
So I decided to go on an adventure. I should say my dad was my Boy Scout leader. He was
All
the
right.
assistant master for my whole time. We had a great relationship till all this terror
Hmm.
came, right? And I was in the Boy Scouts. I was in the National Ski Patrol. I'd spent a week the year before, 10 days the year before, hiking the Appalachian Trail in the winter. I climbed ice
Ooh.
mountains. I'd done all sorts of stuff.
All right.
And so going on this 10-day ice caving, ice climbing, snow caving and ice climbing
Oh man,
adventure
let me tell you
was
that. Let's just like let's caves and ice climbing. Boy, two for
it
the
was up
price of
my
one.
alley. And
Yeah.
so I was looking for something to do, and this guy at the outing club where I was a member and going on backpacking trips and leading trips and
Hmm.
stuff, he had planned this trip to British Columbia snow caving, which right on the border, and Alberta ice climbing off of the Icefields Parkway. And so we went on a trip together, a short trip to the Tetons, and we found out that we were compatible in personality and skill set. And most importantly, it snowed about 8 or 10 inches in the higher elevation we were in, and we weren't really ready for that. But neither of us lost our head, and as a result of that, we both knew that we could trust each other. Neither of us were going to
Okay.
freak out. And
Okay.
it wasn't hard with the snow on the ground. We just like we should have brought snowshoes. We didn't have any snowshoes, so we had to
All
stomp out.
right.
So we went on this probably 8 days of snow caving, backcountry skiing, 70-pound packs, backcountry cross country skis, way out into the wilderness, uh, and and then back in again. And it was great. We had some trouble, of course, but we overcame and loved the challenge. And we got to the climb, and my climbing partner, had came from a more well-to-do family than mine. He had nothing that
Okay.
he wanted for nothing. He had a brand new
Hmm.
car his dad bought him. He had all the ice climbing gear. All of it. His rig was incredible, and he had just finished his certification as a lead ice climber. And so we were, and I'd climbed a lot. I hadn't climbed ice. I'd climbed rock a lot. I've been a rock climber, but I'd camped in the winter my whole life as a Boy
Okay.
Scout. That's what we did. And plus I was skiing every weekend, in the ice cold and on the patrol. So I made a mistake though. My mistake was convincing Tim that I could climb with one axe and a hammer. And the hammer is inky dinky. It's, the size of your
Okay.
fist,
Okay.
with a strap on the bottom and the bird beak that you use to chip out the ice and turn the ice screw this way and that. And it's got a strap on the bottom. You can hang it on your carabiner and not drop it, but you can climb with it. You can stick it in the ice and hang on to it and pull yourself up. The axe, you put it in the ice and you pull yourself up, but it has a strap for you to rest on, and it's a much bigger tool. So you get this huge swing. So
Right.
I convinced him that I could do this because I was 21 and strong of mind. And it turns out he did do it, but I slowed our climb down significantly by hours.
Okay. All
And
right.
that meant that by the time we reached the top of the first of the climb, the sun was setting and the temperature dropped 30 degrees. And we already knew that we were in trouble. I mean, all the other teams, we weren't the only team on the ice. There was like
Right.
a bunch of other teams, and they were left or were leaving, and they were at the bottom, and we were still climbing. And so we're
Okay.
like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so the temperature drops 30 degrees and violent shivers start immediately. Ice climbing can be a wet sport because you're sweating and the ice falls down your back. We were warm during the day. We had enough water and enough food, but we ate all our food and we were out of water and our inner clothes. And this is also in the time before super high tech gear. This is just
Right.
before all that came online.
What
And
elevation were you guys at there?
not very far up. I was probably
Okay.
600 feet from the bottom, but the whole place is like 5,000. The floor is like 5,000 feet. And the tops of the mountains are like 10 and 12 and 14,000 feet. We weren't that far up, but it was
Okay.
March and there was 10 feet of snow on the ground and we're like a day and a half drive from the Arctic Circle. It was, and it's remote. It's really, if you ever look at a population map of Canada, you notice that everybody lives on the American border. It's like 80% of the people live right there because you go further north than that and it's freezing.
There's nothing out there.
And because it's so cold.
Yeah.
And we were north of that, and it was so cold that we knew that we were going to die. It was the month before. So this is March, and in January I was working at Bridger Bowl, which is the ski area in Bozeman, and it was 50 below zero. And I was pulling
50 below zero the month before. Oh my God.
50 below. And in the morning meeting in the ski patrol shack, we were refreshed on hypothermia and frostbite. So that, and we were pulling people off the mountain all day. That's what I did. I go out for a run. You got frostbite. You're out. You got frostbite. You're out. And then I go in, I warm up for an hour. So I knew it was right on the top of my head what the circumstances were going to be for us. So to cut a long story short, we had one of those super high adventure survival stories my book's been optioned for a film, and I've been working with a bunch of LA producers for more than 2 years, as we move towards to making a movie. And one of the reasons why they asked whether they could option this book is because of the high adventure story. It's dramatic. And I'm not going to tell you all of it because it doesn't get to the nub of near-death experience.
Let me ask you. So at this point, like you said, these other teams left. So you guys are there by yourselves.
Oh yeah. And
there's nobody that like, hey, can you spare me up? Nothing.
And not only that, this is a place at the time, because I looked this up. At the time, this is 1980. At the time, there were 1.7 people living per square mile in the entire province, and they all lived in like 2 towns.
Forget it.
So in between, there was nobody. And
literally
nobody. And it's the name of the road is the Ice Fields Parkway because it's full of ice fields. There's glaciers all over the place. And yeah, so I'm laughing about it, but until
I'm sure that right then and there you were like, I'm gonna die.
I was terrifying and I went back in 2016. Somebody sent me back. She's like, "You've never been back. Let me pay your way." And so she flights and car and hotels and food and everything, so I could go back and face my darkness. Which
Let me ask you, is this when you had your near-death experience?
And
hypothermia?
Hypothermia. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I died of hypothermia. I froze to death, and it was in the dark on a cliff trying to get down. With every step that we were taking was draining our remaining energy, and every step was dangerous because we weren't tied to anything and we're on the ice on a cliff trying to walk, traverse.
Oh my God.
And every as hypothermia advances, there are these stages,
Mm-hmm.
and violent shivers is one of them. When I say violent shivers, I mean like every single muscle in my body was
Mm-hmm.
twitching independent of all of them. My face muscles, all my face muscles, my everything, I can't wiggle my ears are moving. Everything on my whole body is twitching and shaking. And so I have less control over my
Okay.
physical body as I'm trying to like maximize my control over my physical body so I don't fall. And then it progresses. It gets, our feet frozen, our hands frozen. I have all my digits, but everything is damaged. I have
Right.
frostbite damage all over me, and
Okay.
in certain places in particular. And and cold is like fire. It's like sticking your hand on a hot bed of coals. And my eyes were freezing, and my
Okay.
my tongue was freezing, so it made it difficult to talk, and my brain was freezing. So one of the things that happens in hypothermia is you begin to lose your reasoning capacity and you start making
Okay.
dumb choices.
Right.
And so we made a couple of those bad choices as a result. We
Let me
lose your
ask you, were you out there? Was it dark, like no lighting, or did you guys have
w-
lighting, or
well, no,
does this?
there was starlight, and I know it's like, oh, there's
To me, that's like,
starlight.
okay, you're in the dark. Sorry, but
Right,
starlight. This is not what I'm asking about.
except for it is because except for when you get far enough away from light pollution,
Right.
the number and there were no clouds in the sky. There was
Okay.
just the galaxy, and the galaxy was brighter. There were more stars in the sky of many of colors and sizes than I'd ever seen before. And I was living in Montana. Like
Okay.
this was just phenomenal. And so there was enough light that we could see in black and white. So it wasn't
Okay.
pitch black. And eventually the moon came up, a three-quarter moon came up, and so we had more illumination. So we weren't like moving blindly in the
Right.
darkness, but it was I'll tell you that the starlight doesn't throw a lot of light, and there's a lot of shadow. So there's
Sure.
a lot of places of dark. And we made this traverse, and it was the three pitch rappel, and we made mistakes, and hypothermia continued to advance, and it got harder and harder. And neither of us lost our heads. We could have
Okay.
panicked, but we figured that we were going to die if we tried to snuggle in the mountain, because the first rule in wilderness training is that if you get lost, you stay where you are. You don't keep
Mm-hmm.
walking unless there's a really good reason to, because they want
Right.
to be able to find you. So we had a really good reason, because if we stayed where we were, we knew we were going to die. It was
Okay.
like
Because
that.
what happened? You guys had no tents, no food, no
Oh,
water,
nobody,
nothing.
nobody had brought up. This is a day. This is like going out on a day hike. You bring the
Okay.
right gear for the right time for the day, and then you're down in your tent. The tent was at the
Okay.
bottom, and all
Oh,
our
okay.
food. So this is 100, maybe 70 yards off of the Icefields Parkway, and there's a parking lot across the street in the Saskatchewan River. We can hear it running all night, and even though it's really, really cold, the river is still running, and
Okay.
everything we needed was right at the bottom, but we couldn't get it, and we didn't have it with us. Nobody did. Nobody climbed with more than they needed, because you're
Okay.
hauling your butt up the mountain.
Right.
So we did have we had ice, so we could keep ourselves hydrated. So I ate a lot of snow, and I ate a lot of chips, stuffing
Okay.
my face with them. So I had enough. I had enough, not enough water coming in, but I had water coming in. And I had this survival drive that I'd not ever had before, that where all of my mental focus went into every single thought I had was about staying alive. There was no wandering mind. And that
Mm-hmm.
included every step I took, and every hand motion was all I thought it through as best I could with my brain. And then there was this point inside myself where I went into a deeper level inside my brain that I didn't know. I sometimes call it the early mammalian part of my brain, and sometimes I call it the early reptilian part of my brain. It's some part
Okay.
of my brain that is in my DNA that predates our rational brain, that is purely about survival.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself slipped inside this place. And when I slipped inside this place, I was no longer forcing myself for survival. I was no longer driving my mind. This part of me was driving me.
Okay.
And that there was an a depth of willpower that I didn't No, I had it, and it
Right.
just kept getting deeper. So by this point, by the point that that was happening, we'd made it through one rappel, and we were headed to the second rappel. And we came down the second rappel, and there was an iron pin with a ring down this dark. We're off the ice, we're on rock now, and this dark craggy area. And we get down to the bottom of this, and Tim went first, and he's standing on a ledge the size of a kitchen table, and in the mountain in front of us are iron pins epoxied in with O-rings, iron, and carabiners and straps with carabiners, because it's the practice. It's the 150 foot climb that people go up to practice their climbing and rappelling.
Right.
And so we're safe from falling here. And so Tim is to my left, and I took the rope, which is a double rope, and I tied one end, and I get frostbite, and everything I do is like I get to take my gloves off, and it's all this. I have to really think about. I have to look at my hands to make sure they're doing the right thing. It's very, very taxing. And I tie one end to my harness, and I take the other end, and I toss it off out around this corner in order to then pull down the line toward us so we can rappel. But as soon as I pulled, it jammed in somewhere up above. It got snug, and then I pulled it again, and it like locked in. So first pull snug, second pull can't tug it at all. And the way the setup was is that there's kind of a corner. The rope.
I was
went
going to
around.
say you can't see what it is.
No, and I can't see what it is because I'm off 10 or 15 feet from 10 feet from the corner. And I'm locked into the mountain, and I got hypothermia. And if I unhook myself, and I'm off the ice, I'm on rock. So I'm on rock with cleats on. I can't even think of the name of them.
I know what you're talking about. Those things with the spikes, those shoes with the spikes on them.
And so I'm on rock, and those are kind of skiddy on rock. They're little tiny metal points. They're not grabbing anything. They're kind of like skates on rock. And so they're not super safe to walk around in the dark when you have hypothermia. And so besides, even if I looked around the corner, I wasn't going to be able to get the rope free because I would have to reascend, which I couldn't do in the gear that I had. And I couldn't do it at a free climb, which I'd done a bunch of free climbing in my life, but I couldn't do a free climb. I couldn't even feel my fingers. And so I tried to flick the line. You know how you flick a line.
Right. See if it'll come loose.
But it was the line lay against the corner of the mountain. I couldn't get the flick to go past the corner, like the end of a frequency wave. So that was it. Now
you can't keep going down.
We can't go down. We can't go up. It's a sheer face up into a sheer face down.
God, yeah.
We could go down. We could drop and onto what's called the talus cone the talus cone is where all the rocks that break off the mountain for 40,000 years pile up in a big jagged pile at the bottom. So we didn't want to do that because it'd kill you.
I was going to say, what was the drop anyway?
150 feet. It was a long way.
Forget it.
It was a long,
No.
Yeah, it was a long way down.
That's very high up.
It was. And so hypothermia continued to advance, and we both knew the circumstance we were in. It was pretty obvious that we were going to die. And I reached that conclusion. I kept pulling on the rope, but I was like, okay, I'm going to die here. This is it. I can't get out of this. Nobody's coming by to rescue us. And I began to have this heat rush to my core of my body, which is another stage. And all the heat rushed to my core, and I got warm. I got hot. My chest got hot. My belly got hot. My head kind of got hot. And I remember thinking, oh, that's good. My blood is into my vital organs, and I need my heart. I don't really need my feet. It's into my lungs. I need my lungs. I don't really need my hands. I really need these things. But I got so hot and irrational that I unzipped my coat.
That's why I've heard that people with hypothermia undress themselves.
Yeah, they do. And I did. I didn't completely undress, but I unzipped my coat. And Tim, and we only talked. Our situation was so desperate and our energy level so low that we had an agreement that we would only speak as few words as necessary when only necessary, never any other time. Because every time we spoke, it was like you watched the gas meter go down to click, click. Every time we moved, click, click, click. And so not only were we fighting against the cold, we were fighting against our own energy reserve, which is what was keeping us warm. So we knew that
Okay.
if we stayed where we were, not moving, we were going to die. If we moved, we had a chance because we were going to generate our own heat. But we're running out of energy to generate the heat, and everything we did took away that energy.
Okay.
So he yelled at me, and I was like, what do you know anyway? Or whatever I said
I'm
to him.
hot. I'm hot.
I'm hot. And then I had this realization that, oh yeah, that's a hypothermic thing. And I didn't care. But when I realized it, I had this peace come over me because I recognized that, that's the third to last stage, and I wasn't getting out of the situation I was in. And so the drive went out of me. When the drive went out of me, this peace settled on me, this acceptance of death. And I started thinking about God and my family and my sister missing and my mom and my dad and how I was going to die, and it was going to be in all the papers, at least it's going to be in Montana and in Boston and in Calgary because, a couple of young fools died ice climbing. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be this big splash. And my mom's going to really break. It's like, it's going to be the final thing. But I had this acceptance of inevitability, nothing I could do about it. And I began to fall asleep, and when I fell asleep, it was like a curtain falling on a stage, a lead weighted curtain on a stage, and it would just crash down. Boom. I'd lose consciousness. I'd fall to the ground that I was harnessed in and smack my helmeted head and my shoulder on the rock. And that would jar me awake. And I get back up and I pull on the rope. And this happened a couple, 3, 5 times. I don't know, a bunch of times it happened. I pull on the rope, and this time I got up. And as I got up, I opened my eyes, and my peripheral vision was surrounded by a big black circle that I'd never seen before. And this big black circle started closing in very quickly, very quickly. And as it closed in, I got more and more tunnel vision. And I was like, oh yeah, tunnel vision. That's part of one of the stages. And I'm like, what is going on? But I didn't understand what was going on because I'd never oh yeah, this is what it is. But what is this? This is this is the name of it. But what is this thing? And it was like, and as it was closing down, it got to almost the end. And I thought to myself, oh, I must be falling asleep. That's what it is. I must be falling asleep. And so as I had that thought, I expected to have an end of my consciousness, but instead it went, psh, and then instead of having an end of my consciousness, I woke up, and it was like, I'm awake. Why am I awake? Where's my pain? Why, where's the mountain? What is this? And this in front of me opened into this vast darkness, this, I don't want to say infinite darkness, but the size of the cosmos darkness. It was huge in front of me, and I was on the edge of it. And way far in the distance, this starlight of white light popped into existence, like this little tiny particle pops into existence, and it's luminous, and it rushes toward me, covering faster than the speed of light. It rushes, it covers this distance, and as it gets to me, it expands, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'm like, what is going on here? And it communicates to me telepathically, non-linguistically, I'm taking you. And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I don't understand what's going on, but I'm staying right here. And so I took this willpower that I had, and I put it up like a shield, and it just was nothing. It just took me as if I was paper, and it was a boulder, and it pulled me out of myself. It plucked me, and it enveloped me inside itself. And now I know who it is. It's my angel friend, and I'm inside of this angelic being, and it's different this time. It's bigger this time, and I'm different. I'm unable to move. I have my light body, but it's less corporeal than the previous times. I don't know how to explain that. It's more, I'm not attached to my body anymore. Every other time I'd had an experience, I was still attached to my body.
There was
but
still
now,
that link between you and your body.
Right. But now there is no link. And I know this. I was like, oh, that's it. And it's communicating to me. So this angelic being, this intelligence, so everything I'm saying is in metaphor, and everything I say is a minuscule, tiny bit of what I'm trying to say. When I say intelligence, we think of like the smartest people in the world. Nothing like that. It's like the smartest people in the world are the size of an atom, and this intelligence is the size of the cosmos. That's that huge difference. And this thing is most intelligence. It's also, almighty. It has power. It took me. I was like a rag doll. I had no autonomy. I had no agency, and I'm inside of it. I'm sort of in this layered pressure, and it's sending me through all of itself compassion and comfort and welcome. And I was content. I was like, okay, I can't move. It's cool. But I could see out through it. And we were traveling back up the route that it had come. And I had a bilocation. So I was not only inside, I was also outside of it, looking at me and it from an outside point of view.
Okay.
But when I inside of it looked to find that, I couldn't see it. But I was an I, a non-local I. I felt like I was part of the greater divine, but I was a limited form that like a higher self than the self that was in the angelic being. And
so you were like participant and observer at the same time.
Yes. And up we went, for lack of a better direction or term, to the edge of where it had popped into existence for me. When at first I could see it, it unfolded itself, and I popped out into this other kind of darkness. This darkness was no thingness. There were no things here. I was no thing. This darkness was, if the darkness I was just in had some substance to it in the size of a single universe, this had no substance to it in the size of 10,000 universes. It was just blackness that was illuminated, paradoxically, both. I could see in it, although it was all darkness, and I could see depth in it, although it was all darkness. But only to a point. And at that point, the infinity was itself darkness. And I was in this great ocean. I was a drop in an ocean, but I was content, and I was ginormous in comparison to what I am now, like much bigger. And I knew myself. I was, oh yes, this is me. How did I forget me? How did I think that was me? And this me, I had no brain and no body and no eyes and fingers, but I could see, hear, think, all as my whole energy was one thought being of feeling and understanding. And because I didn't have a brain in the way of my thinking, I could think rapidly. Like rapidly is like a weak word for what I'm trying to say. And as I'm in this place of contentment, the darkness opens, and this darkness sort of rips open, or a kind of widens open, and there is this waterfall of light, and as big as I am, this is much bigger than me, and it's got some distance away from me, and it's still gigantic, and it is made up of all of the colors of all of the stars that I had seen that night. And there were lots of colors, but it was also all of the electromagnetic spectrum, X-rays and infrared rays, and there are all these little tiny particles of all these different kinds of light, and more than just the electromagnetic spectrum. It was a billion different types of frequencies and colors of light, and simultaneously all these little tiny pieces of glitter that were this waterfall were also all pure white. So it was both at the same time, not switching between one and the other, but simultaneously both. And it had this dimensionality to it. It had a solid surface, which was solid and I couldn't see through, but there was a translucence to it simultaneously. So I could see the depth of it. And there was a transparency. I could see through it, and through it was a darkness. I was a tunnel that led into a deeper darkness, and it was the most seductively beautiful, desirous. All I wanted was it. And I had this thought, I want you. And as I had that thought, I moved toward it. My thought was my movement. And as I thought it, I moved, and it moved toward me. And I came right up to it and touched it with my being. And as I touched it with my being, it was all life, capital A, capital L, all life. It was the living thing, the living being, and it opened me and poured inside of me and inflated me and surrounded me, and it spoke in a voice without sound inside me and around me, and I could hear it, but I couldn't see it. And then all these things, and also I should add, this is in
Let
timelessness.
me ask you, so that
Yes.
prototypical near-death experience that you hear of the tunnel and you see people dearly departed come for you, this was not your experience.
No, but as a clergy person, I attended, I was a specialist in death and dying, go figure.
Okay.
And so I attended quite a number of deaths in hospitals and hospice where that would happen. The
Okay.
relatives would come and they'd see them and they'd talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
That was
So
not
maybe it
my
wasn't
experience.
because you didn't have that experience because you weren't going to die at that point back then,
I
or come back anyway.
Well, lots of near-death experience. I chose to come back.
Okay.
I was not sent back. I was meant to die. And
Okay.
I made it, I was given a choice and made a decision. And that's a
Right.
weird thing because I was given a choice and made a decision, but the omniscient being is omniscient.
Okay.
So I did it know that I was going to choose what I
Right. I was
chose?
going to say, right, if you go down that rabbit hole, it's
Yeah,
like, well, I knew what you were going to pick. So,
right. So what's free will? I don't really know, but I did
right.
have a choice. I can say that. So on all these things, I'm in timelessness, and all these things happen at once, and it's very difficult to talk about sequentially. But I've created a chronology because I don't know how to talk about it any other way. So it flows into me, and literally all these things happen at the same time, and it takes a long time, but it takes no time at all. It says everything about it's paradoxical. So it sees me. I'm being seen. It's inside of me, and there's no part of my human self that
Mm-hmm.
escapes the glaring eye of light. I have
Okay.
no the little tiny dark corners or big corners where I've stuffed away my shame or the whatever it is that I want to hide from other people. There's no hiding. Everything is seen. Everything is seen about me, and I'm like shocked by I am fully known. I know you. I've always known you. There's nothing. I know you as you live, meaning
Right.
I'm with you, knowing you as you live. I'm in the experience with you. And then as this is happening, I hear my name called, my soul name being called. I see that I'm being always called into being. And so that's constantly going on while this other thing happens. And this other thing happens is that it shows me my life review is a hell of my own construction where
Mm-hmm.
I go through all of the pain that I gave everyone in my entire life from inside of them, experiencing it as they experienced it with their emotions and their psychological reactions and their chemical reactions. Simultaneous to that, I am also my human self experiencing every single thing I was doing to them to cause them that. So I'm in these two places at once, experiencing my reasons and my emotions for causing this pain that I want to cause to you. And then I'm over here inside my sisters primarily, because,
Mm-hmm.
they're my
Right.
family. And so I'm inside and there's this one thing that I'm feeling all of her anger and all of her shock and all of her pain and all of her surprise and all of her wound. And it's gigantic in comparison to my causation. Her response is disproportionate by tenfold. And
Okay.
I'm shocked that I had caused so much pain. And it's sequential. It starts as a little baby, and it
Mm-hmm.
runs right up through today, then that day.
Right.
And I'm inside of all of these people experiencing all of their pain. And I know that the divine is in them experiencing the pain, because that's how the divine knows their pain.
Okay.
And while I'm in this place, I see I experience shame, and the shame I experience is guilt is different than shame. Guilt is feeling badly about something you did. Shame is feeling badly about who you are.
Okay.
And I was like, but it wasn't shame just because of the bad things that I did and the pain that I caused that I didn't know that I was causing, but it was in comparison. My limited nature was in comparison to the unlimited purity of love. And so I wasn't judged. The divine did not judge me. I judged myself in this comparison between my limited form and the divine fullness of unlimited pure love, because it was speaking love to me the whole time. I love you. I know you. I've always known you. I've always loved you. I've loved you through, you did this bad thing. I loved you right while you were doing this bad thing. I love you no matter what. I love you. I love you. I love you. And it showed me, as I entered into this broken space of my own shame, it showed me all of humanity, this radical equality of all of humanities, all the darkness of humanity, all the bad things that humans do all the time to each other in the extreme, including the in the extreme. And there was this radical equality between us. We were like one thin sheet of paper, and the divine was immeasurably other and whole. And so one of the after effects that I came back with is this humility for everyone's faults, because I see my own, and I see this broken nature of myself, and I see the equality of the broken nature of everybody else. But it wasn't just human beings. It was the entire universe, the whole thing, all of the coding of the universe. The creator creates this place of limitation, and the limitation is necessary for the creation to exist. No limitation, no suffering, no consumption of something else, no wounding,
Right.
no world, no universe.
Let me ask you, when that point came, were you asked, do you want to go back, or did you say, I want to go back?
Well, the point comes quite a ways away in my story, but I asked to go back. I was being welcomed the whole time.
Right. In other words, it wasn't, you weren't asked, do you want to go back? You, in the midst of this experience where you're thinking, that's it,
I wasn't
on the other
thinking
side.
that. I asked if I was dead, and the voice was, yes, you're dead.
Okay. All right.
But I also asked to go back.
All right.
And so.
And the reason why I ask is that, to me, it sounds like you're having this wonderful experience. Mind blowing, as a matter of fact. So I'm thinking it must have taken a lot for him to decide to go back.
I'll tell you what happened. So I'll get to that part.
Sure. Okay.
And when I explain all the rest of the stuff, it'll make more sense. So I see the broken nature of the universe, and that we are not at fault for that. I am not, even though I made choices about wounding people and hurting them, and it turned out that was my karma, that all of the pain I gave away karmically stuck to me, adhered to me. And I listened to the voice of love, and as I listened through because I also brought all the love that I gave away and all the love that had been given to me in my life, and as I listened through the lens of love, I began to hear, welcome, welcome, I love you, welcome, forgiven, welcome, come to me, it's your time, come to me. And as I listened, I turned toward it, and as I turned toward it, all of this karmic baggage vanished. Didn't just like fall away to earth and end up in a dump heap somewhere. It dematerialized, and it was no longer existed. And I figuratively turned to the divine, and I inflated. And as I inflated with this collection of things on earth that we put into different categories: truth, love, knowledge, bliss, awe, understanding, paradise, adoration, all these truths were one truth. And as I
Okay.
expanded into this one truth, beauty, love, light, I saw my name is still being called, and instead of seeing my human self being called into being, I see my soul self being called into being, and I understand that this is my eternal nature being called into being now, always in the now, but also over eons. So it's this
All right.
paradoxical thing of the timeline of eons, but also always only in the now. And as I'm being called and inflated to this point where I was still I was in communion with the oneness of being. Any further into the oneness of being, and I would have annihilated, obliterated, and been the thing itself. But I didn't. I
Okay.
stayed in this communion state of union where I was in adoration, but I saw the myself in two, three other ways simultaneously. I saw myself as a singular photon. I
Mm-hmm.
experienced myself as a singular photon superpositioned with a field of photons, and this field of photons was the divine being, infinitely deep, infinitely high, infinitely low, infinitely wide. But I was separate from it, outside of
Okay.
it, but like a cable connected to it. And so
All
I
right.
was both it and not it simultaneously, limited form of the it. And this is it was the core of my original self. And from this position, I saw another self below me. And this other self below me was also me, but it was my soul self. And my soul self was like, I've been describing it as a big loaf of like a baguette, a huge baguette. And in
Mm-hmm.
this baguette were kebab spears and hundreds of kebab spears. And each one of these kebab spears was a life that I had lived, but they were
Okay.
all being lived simultaneously and
Oh.
into different like universes. And
Okay.
but none of them were me. I am this photon. Even the soul self, which is me, is not really me. And none of the lives are me. I am this almost all of the superpositioned, unlimited form. I'm
Let
almost
me
that.
ask you, this being or whatever, are we talking a singular? I mean,
Oh,
or
it's
were you thinking it was a
it,
group? I don't know how to
it
best
was
describe that.
one and many. It was a
Okay, you
single
understand what
one,
I'm asking,
and
right?
it was a single one. It was a single field and a
Mm-hmm.
bazillion photons.
Okay.
But they were all one, even though they were separate. It's paradoxical.
Okay.
And so I see the elongation of the long tail of my soul life, my
All right.
incarnatable life. And there are these incarnations I see inside them. And even though they're in timelessness, because they're all happening for me right now, there's also
Okay.
this chronology to them. And way at the end is my most recent. And
All
and
right.
I ask,
Mm-hmm.
can I look? And so I go down inside this one life, and I'm inside this one life, and I am a man, and I'm when it's an old, it's like it had a Middle Eastern feel to it, and
Okay.
I've got sandals and dirty feet, and there are palm trees, and I can't see myself, but I see the people I'm with. I'm with a bunch of people, a bunch of men,
Okay.
and we're walking, and there are people like selling things and mothers with children, and they're all walking, and everybody's talking, and it's a sunny day, and there's dust, and I'm like occupying this person as an outsider. And then I'm out
Okay.
of this person, and then I'm into a previous life. And in this previous life, I don't know what I was. I was like inside some kind of either alien on another planet or some kind
Okay.
of mammal or reptile with a different set of eyes, seeing an entirely different world. I don't know where I was or what I was.
Okay.
And I'm out again, and then I'm also simultaneous to all of this, I'm being inflated. So I'm also being all of this is at the same time. And then sorry, I keep whacking my mic here. I gotta move that angle, do that. Um, and then I deflate. And as I deflate, I come back to the void And I wanted to know about the structure of the universe. And I was shown how the whole thing's put together. And it's way complicated,
Okay.
way complicated. And I comprehended it, but even in my comprehension of it, I knew that there was more that I couldn't see because infinity. And so I shrunk down to this smaller size, and I say, "Am I dead?" And the voice is like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, you're dead." I say, "Well, what about my parents and their suffering?" And as I think this thought, it's also saying to me the whole time, "Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home,
Mm-hmm.
welcome, welcome, welcome." And I'm swept across the belly of this universe, this space, this void, to an edge where it's permeable, and part of me is tucked outside of it while the mass of me is inside this heaven. Part of me can see our galaxy, I mean our universe, and I can see all of our universe as it was right then. And I could see incredible distances. I could see the origin of our universe. I can see our universe being born into being. And there is this darkness, this infinite darkness out of which this light is coming. It's like
Okay.
manifesting this light, and this light is weaving itself into all matter in our universe. And I can see that all matter, all these galaxies, 100,000 galaxies, a million galaxies, they're all woven of this light inside them. And I can see it woven through everything, not just the planets and the galaxies, but all the space in between, the whole thing. Everything is made of this. And as I look back into time, to the origin, this
Mm-hmm.
darkness is birthing universe after universe after universe. I'm
Okay.
seeing in this one universe, but there's like one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, and all of it, the entirety of all these universes, and this universe I'm in, and the infinite darkness itself is made of love, and it is speaking love as it makes everything into being, and it aims all of this love directly at me.
All
And it
right.
says to me, from inside of me, behind me, around me, above me, it says to me, in the way that I love you now, which is infinite, incomprehensible love, the way I love you now, I have always loved you, will love you, and all is well, has been well, and will be well, because I am wellness. I am goodness. I pervade everything that there is, and I love myself, and nothing is lost. And as it says this, my vision is swept down through our galaxy to our Earth in lifetime, and it's a, a hologram with 7 billion people on it, and I can see every single person at the same time. Not like there's Joe and there's Mary. It's like I see Joe and Mary at the same time, and all their family, everybody. 7 billion people, and they're half the planet sleeping, and half the planet, some of the planets at war, and there's babies being born. I see everything, humans, beings living,
All right.
and I want to get closer because I see inside of every single human being there is a tiny, tiny, singular point of golden light.
Okay.
Everyone has this, and I go down into to the Atlantic Ocean, and there's a Navy ship, and on the ship are a bunch of Navy people. Our Navy, and I go to a person, to an officer, and inside of this officer is this golden light, and he can't see it. I see it. I see it on everybody in the deck, right up close. It's right inside them. Nobody can see it. And I'm pulled back out again, and I see the whole earth is covered with this dense foam, like a fog, and it
Okay.
blinds everybody to the light that is the divine itself. And as I see this, it says to me, "You are my particularly most beloved one with this eternal love, but so is everybody else." Everybody has this. I love every single person with this infinite love that you're experiencing now. And because of my love and all is well, you don't have to worry about anyone or your parents. And as
All
it
right.
talks about my parents, I see their faces, and I see mom and dad and all of their collective suffering inside their faces. And then I see two timelines, mom and dad in timeline A, mom and dad in timeline B, and they're parallel. But in A, I'm not there. And their
Okay.
suffering is immense. And mom is broken and dad is broken, and their suffering is magnified tenfold. And and B, I'm with them and they still suffer, but it's not as bad.
All right.
And I see the end of their lives. I
Okay.
see in their deaths, they come to the place where I am, in belovedness, in wellness, in wholeness, in no painness.
Right.
And the voice says, choose. Here they are. And I say, I choose to live my life. And I say, if I choose to go back, because now I also know the length of my life and everybody's life is a snap of a finger. It's like,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, I can do that. If I go back there to help them out and they don't have to live all this terrible suffering, do I come back here? And the divine said, yes, you come back here. And I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And it said, you won't live your life, and poof, shot me out. And as I was
Right.
shot out, I was back inside this angelic being, and I was continually compressed. And as I was flying with it, I was getting more corporeal as I went. I saw this huge beam of, like a big, huge white laser beam beside us, like a highway laser beam, like we're going down the highway and there's this laser beam. And I look back and I can see the laser beam going back behind us into the darkness, but I can no longer see into the darkness. I can't see into heaven. I see this beam. And as I look forward, there are a million doors, and all of these, and in the center of all of these doors is the beam of white light. And it radiates in brightness out to fading as it goes to the outer edges. And the voice said, choose. And it was the voice of the divine, but it was also the voice of the angel. And it's the same voice, but it says, choose light. And I had to make a choice. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got a job to do. I've got a messenger. I better be a flawed human if I'm going to try to communicate with flawed humans. So I didn't choose the pureness of light. I chose a combination. I chose close to the beam, but not the beam. I was, and I, as soon as I thought this, I'm in the door, and down the doorway, down this tunnel I go, and in the tunnel are 10,000 doors. And all these 10,000 doors are these choices that lead to all these other tunnels. And I go right down this tunnel, and I end up outside of my body. And now I am very small. I am compressed into like a ball, and I can see my body dangling on the cliff, held by the harness. And Tim is above me, and I can't hear him, but he's bent over looking at me. And then the angel like stuck something inside the chest of this body, which was my body, and opened it and twisted me painfully inside. And then I was inside, and I could see, like I had an eye in my heart, and I could see the angelic being, and I could see back into heaven. And then it just closed. Poof. And as it closed, my brain started coming back online. And as soon as it came back online, pain came. And I had like, what is this? Where I'm trapped in this thing, and what just happened to me? What am I doing here? What is this thing? I didn't understand anything. My brain's coming back online, and sound started to come. I started to hear, and it started to resolve into recognizable yelling words. And the words were, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die. And he's like shaking me and don't die, don't die, don't die. And I opened my eyes, and he's like, you're not dead. You're not dead. You were dead. You're not dead. I'm not dead. You're not dead. If you were going to die, I was going to die. And I'm like, what am I? Where am I? What is this thing? Who is he? What's going on? I don't know. Why does it hurt so much? And he helps me stand up, and he's talking to me, and I really don't know who I am. I don't know who he is. I don't know what's going on. And eventually he's like, you're okay. Talking to me. And my brain kind of catches on. Oh yeah. We're ice climbing, and this guy's Tim. And at some point he says, pull the rope. And I pull the rope, and a rope comes free. And we descend.
Wow.
And we descend, and the car's right across the street. And he's like, let's get in the car and heat it right up. I was like, no, we can't do that. We have to gradually bring our bodies back up to temperature, or it'll kill us. We have hypothermia. So we set up the tent, and we went through hypothermic treatment, which I could tell you, and eventually we got into the car. By dawn, we were warm enough to use the heat, and I came back an entirely different person. I bet. Everything about my life changed. I looked the same. I still had the same impetuosity. I still had the same brain. Everything,
Please don't tell me you went back and did any more ice.
No, that was my last ice climb, but I still live a rather adventurous life. I'm just
I
not
don't
ice
get
climbing
it.
anymore. I've done other
Did you
things.
ever tell your poor parents what happened,
Oh
or
my
did you
God.
just keep that
So,
to yourself?
oh no, the next night, okay, so it gets worse. All right, as bad as this was, it gets worse.
Okay.
So we drive home, and I didn't tell Tim because he was an atheist, and I didn't understand what had happened to me anyway.
Right.
So then, the long story short, we spent a little time in jail that night. We had to pay our way out. We got to, and then I totaled Tim's car against a semi,
Oh my God. Okay.
and then I had, and then I got a
Oh my God.
stutter, and then and we had enough money for him to take a bus back to Bozeman, and I hitchhiked back with my stutter, and I called my parents from Billings with my stutter, and some guy, it was terrible, and some angel rancher with the classic big cowboy hat and the
Right.
big mustache and the buckle and the boots and the pickup truck. He saved me. This guy, he took me in. I was a wreck. I stepped out in front of his truck and I stopped him on the highway. I'm like, I am in so much trouble. I am so broken. And so he brought me into Billings and he bought me dinner.
All
And
right.
then he took me to the bus station and he bought me a ticket to Bozeman.
And he says,
And
be
he
on your. Hey, be quiet, you guys.
and
I'm
he
sorry.
bought
Keep going.
and he gave me like whatever it was, a dime or a quarter to call my parents collect. And so I did. I called my
So
parents.
you didn't even have money for a phone
Oh,
call?
I had because we gave most of the money to the Mounties to pay our
Oh,
fine. And the only money that we had between us was enough to buy Tim a bus ticket back to Bozeman. I was broke. I had nothing.
okay.
And so, and I had no food, and I was I don't have a stutter, and I do still have a stutter. Okay. I have learned to control my stutter.
Okay.
And when I get anxious, when I get highly anxious, I start to stutter again, and I can stop myself. But at that point, I was Mr. Stutter, and I
All
called
right.
my parents on the phone, and I'm stuttering on the phone. They're like, "What happened to you?" And so I told them everything except for that I died. I kept that a secret for 20 years.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's a better choice to have done that.
Yeah, it was it was a better choice for sure, because I ended up telling a couple of people over the lifetime, and at one point there was psychiatric care being suggested for me. And
But
and
so what did you just tell him, Mom, Dad? Hey, I need some money to come back home.
no, I didn't say that. I said I'm alive. I had this terrible event, ice climbing, but I'm on my way back to Bozeman.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to let you know that I'm okay. I didn't ask him for any money. I had some money in the bank account,
Okay.
and I was like, I didn't have any cash on me, but I was a college
Right. It was
student.
just that you need to get back over there.
Yeah. So I got back to Bozeman. I hitchhiked back to Bozeman, and I was living in a co-op, and I got back to the co-op, and I was a wreck, and I was in a theater troupe too. So I had part of the thing that happened when I was at Bozeman is I started learning American Sign Language and taking mime classes, and I ended up auditioning for this touring company that we left in 2 weeks after this happened, on a national tour to 21 states and 64 shows, 21,000 miles and 24,000 miles. And I isolated myself from the troupe by sitting in the back of the pickup truck in my sleeping bag and didn't ride in the van with everybody else because I was a wreck. But okay, so here's the on the upside of all of this. I went to this Catholic high school outside of Boston, and the Catholic high school had like an association with a monastery. And in this monastery, they developed what is now popularly known as centering prayer. But at the time, it was contemplative meditation, and they had tapped into the Theravada Buddhist tradition with Jack Kornfield and the Cloud of Unknowing and Teresa of Avila, and they developed this centering practice, which I learned in high school and was still practicing because it was. So this became my.
I was going to say
salvation.
that's a very wow. Talk about coincidence, right?
Yeah. Well, the whole thing I had a whole bunch of other mystical experiences before this happened, of significant proportion that I never understood
Okay.
until after I died. And after I died, it was like, oh, that's what they were all about. And that their meanings became clear. And because I went to Catholic school, I read, the four gospels, but when I came back, Jesus was a different guy. He had changed into a near-death experiencer. He sounded like I thought, but
Right.
Well, I kept it a secret, and I began exploring because I was an English major. I was exposed to the Eastern writers, and I read the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita and Tao Te Ching and Chuang Tzu, and I read Buddhist literature, um, and I began my practice of Kriya Yoga because in a mime class I was taking back at UMass, my mime teacher was in Marcel Marceau's school. He had studied in the school of Marcel Marceau, and Marcel Marceau taught yoga.
Okay.
And my teacher was had prana, had chi. He's also a kung fu practitioner, and so he showed us. And I was the only one in the class who had it. He showed me my prana, my chi. And once I felt the energy that was me surrounding this physical form, I resolved immediately to pursue that because I knew this was me. And then when I read the Yoga Sutras, and in the second section, I came across the practice of Kriya Yoga, and then I read Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography, 25th chapter. He talks about Kriya Yoga, and I thought, if these guys are right, it's the only way I'm ever going to get sane in this world. Okay. So I began this 40-year practice of for my interior journey, which led me out of architecture school. I was going to go to graduate school in architecture, join the family business, but instead, my sister was in graduate school for architecture at the time, but instead I went to divinity school. And I studied mysticism. My parents were like, what are you doing?
It must have been what happened.
They had what is this? Because I had spent my childhood drawing, like at my dad's drafting board in the office, and I worked construction all the way through college, so that I could like know the blue collar end of stuff. I could communicate on both sides. I could work both sides of the fence, and I gave all of that up in an instant. It was all gone, and I went to the divinity school, went to Yale to study mysticism because I thought about going to the monastery, but I liked sex too much. And I was like, I can't do that.
That's not me.
It's like, how am I going to do that? And so I convinced one of the deans to allow me a 3-year independent study. And she became my professor for 3 years, and actually found money from the university to hire a specialist professor for me for a semester. And I got to take classes around the university and write a thesis for her. And it was all in the classical Western mysticism, because I knew that there had to be peers. I knew I had to have peers in the world. I couldn't be the only person like this. Okay. And I found in the literature of the mystics, people who had had experiences like me, and they had practices of breath and mental focus that tunneled their way back to the divine. And so I became a student of mysticism, East and West. I'm still a student of it. I still study it, but only from self-motivation, only as a means of survival, only as a means to not feel alone. And then the dean talked me into becoming ordained. I finally decided I'll get my graduate degree. I'll get my doctoral degree in mysticism, and I'll be a professor. But she's like, no, I really think you got all this compassion. I think you'd be a great pastor. So she talked me into this liberal denomination, ordained women in the 1800s, gay people in the 1990s, like right out there with social justice, but not a mystical bone in their body.
And so you arrived.
I arrived, and there I was.
And that's really unusual, because it's right. You took like a turn as far as you kind of plan your life, and all of a sudden you find you're a pastor
and not a believer.
Right. So what did they do? Did they assign you to I'm thinking in Catholic, like a parish, or did they send you
I didn't go
someplace, or what?
Catholic. I didn't go Catholic. I went Protestant.
Well, no, but I'm saying, did they assign you?
No, I applied for jobs. So the way that this denomination works is I didn't apply for jobs. Actually, what happened was I was in 3 of us were invited to preach. The school picked 3 people to preach, and I was one of them. And at the end of this preaching thing, this guy came up to me and said, hey, I'm looking for an associate interim minister. I really like what you said and what you did. You're interested in the job? I'm like, Yeah. And this is the other thing is that's the second time I got recruited. I got recruited when I was a divinity student by the chairman of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Albertus Magnus College, who was looking for a teaching assistant. And we ended up and he recruited me. And it's like that's like, oh, I should be a professor. And so this guy recruits me, and I make this little deal with myself. I'll give it 3 years because I'm not a Protestant. I'm not anything. I am not a believer. I am not a believer. I don't believe anything. I don't believe everything about humanity is made up. And it's all based in language and in concepts, and none of them exist outside of our heads.
Okay.
And
so how did you, wow, that's a tough. So, okay. So did they offer you this job, and what you're asking yourself that question? How am I gonna?
Yeah, I did, but I also I was already working in the homeless movement in New Haven. New Haven at the time was the 10th poorest city in the nation.
All
And I
right.
was already working among the homeless and in the soup kitchens. So I was already living out my compassion outside of the requirements of the school and the university.
All right.
And so I was downtown working in the soup kitchens and working in the homeless shelters, and besides my work study jobs and that kind of stuff and my studies. And so I got hired by these people, and I was the associate minister, and I had the best minister in the entire state was my guy. And he was compassionate and smart and kind and capable and caring. He's just like super top notch. He was 3rd generation clergy. He was just excellent. And he's still my friend. I live in Maine. He lives a couple of peninsulas east of me. And anyway, so at the end of these 3 years, I was done and out. I was like, this is not for me. I was working with the youth and the homeless in New Haven and shelters and stuff. And I was like, I'm done with this. I don't fit in this at all. But we had a baby coming. Suddenly we're pregnant, despite like triple layer protection. So foam, diaphragm, and condom, and
you're gonna have a baby.
A 3-tiered failure.
Yeah.
And my wife was working. She was an epidemiologist at Yale, and the grant that she was working under ran out, and because she was pregnant, they let her go because she's pregnant. They wouldn't hire pregnant people, and so she can't get a job. And I didn't fit in my job. I did a good job. They liked me.
Right.
But I needed work. And so I stayed in the church, and I hid inside the church. I even had in my contract in all the churches that I served that they had to leave me space for study and meditation and yoga. And I never explained to them why I needed those 3 things. They're like, study. Well, yeah, you should be studying anyway. Okay. But this meditation and yoga thing, it's like, yeah, take it. It's my prayer life. It's my prayer life. I just need to. So I created a space inside my work life where I could dive inside myself and continue my esoteric studies. I stopped studying Eastern religion because I didn't want to slip up. I didn't want to make a mistake in the pulpit and get fired because I needed a job. I had kids.
Almost your sermon takes a weird turn.
Somebody's talking about Buddha. And the one time I did talk about Buddha once, and I got a bad reception. And so and so I read all of the Nag Hammadi texts, all of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I read all of the material around those. So I dove very deeply into the ancient mystical literature of the West, and not just the Nag Hammadis and the Dead Sea Scrolls, but there's a huge number of mystical writers in the West. They've been repressed by the church. Not really. Well, repressed is a strong word. It's isolated from the general Christian population. Let's keep this literature. Let's keep this away from them. That it won't be good for us. They shouldn't know about it. And some of these people, the church wanted to kill because of their experience of oneness. And so what I learned in the literature, East and West, is that mental focus and breath are the divine practices of selflessness. Whether you're a Sufi or a Trappist monk, it's basically the same thing, or a yogi or a chi master, and that they all talk in metaphor and they're all saying the same thing. And all of them speak contextually within their cultural context. So their religious
Okay.
context, their time context, and that includes their social context. So, for instance, one of the great writers of the West, his name was John Rusbrook, blessed John Rusbrook, the love mystic. That's like as he is known, the love mystic. He also started the Children's Crusade. So, in the
Okay.
context of his time, he was blessed and human. And that's the other thing I learned about this is that every single one of these great masters, Lao Tzu, Jesus, Muhammad, every single one of them was fully human. They weren't
Okay.
walking around in the angelic bliss. Okay, so they are walking around in the blissed out state, but it's not what you think it is.
Right.
It's
In other
this,
words, they were experiencing life totally as a human.
yeah, all of the emotions, all of the
Mhm.
mistakes, all of the good things and all of the bad
Right.
things. The difference is that in the process of the elimination of self, of the false self, of attachment to the false self, there creates a space for the divine being to indwell, to fill this space. And in every breath, if a person practices meditation over a period of time, you will have had this experience where the mind stops thinking. It's no longer
Mhm.
chanting the word. It's no longer listening to the breath. It's just no self. And in that stillness place, there's like a nugget that drops inside, and that nugget stays. And then every time you touch that space, another nugget drops, and it just grows and grows and grows, nugget by nugget. And these nuggets are the now. They're the eternal now. And
When
hmm?
when you were going, how's this? I know that you said that you were doing this basically out of necessity because of the circumstances.
I
When
was.
you were going through all of this, did any part of you or your soul recognize that there was a reason why you were having to do this?
Oh yeah. I didn't like it.
Okay.
I was
All right.
rebellious, as you might expect.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Right.
I on that morning after the truck, after I hit the semi, um,
Wow.
there was this roaring inside of me, the calling me. No language, just this roaring inside of me, telling me that I had to be a messenger and giving me no words, but I had this
Okay.
job to do. And I was like, "You didn't tell me," even though it did. I I didn't realize when it said you wouldn't live your life what it meant, and I was mad
Okay.
about it and depressed, and I felt like I was in exile and isolated and banished, and all I wanted was to go home.
All
And
right.
so my purpose became the communication of this entity, this light, in everything I do.
Okay.
Even if I make poor choices and hurt somebody,
Sure. Of course. That's the
it's
human
the
condition.
human
Yeah.
condition. And so I went in pursuit of language to containerize my experience so that I could understand it for myself.
Hmm.
But mostly I realized that I could learn. I was an English major. I understood the
Okay.
power of story and how language communicates ideas, but it can't communicate the ineffable. But in the
Okay.
literature, so here's something you may not know. Um, Ernest Hemingway had a near-death experience, and if you read his literature, especially Old Man in the Sea, you see some of that. And so I learned that, and I didn't know that about him. I didn't know that about Hemingway until like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
But
I didn't know that.
always in his writing, I could see this other spirituality. And so I understood that it could be woven into language and communicated in a way, but the real way that I wanted to communicate it, since that mime class where I found my prana, I wanted to communicate it directly. I wanted to become a channel of it, a containment of the light, and so that the light would speak for itself because it sees itself, it knows itself, it hears itself. I came back with all of my senses are one sense. Do you
Okay.
see the light? Do you hear the light? Do you feel the light? Those aren't different things for me. They're aspects
Right.
of one thing for me. And that one thing for me is the way that I've tried to learn to get out of the way enough to let it communicate itself. And sometimes through my voice, through my throat chakra, through working in my belly and bringing it up and getting out of the way. And I learned, I was in television for 15 years. I had a TV show. I was a writer in a TV show, had a TV show up here in Maine, and a 2-minute broadcast to tell a story of love and hope and inspiration.
Okay.
And I began to practice this getting out of the way. I meditated before I wrote. I meditated before I got on camera, and it was taped. And then people started writing into the TV station saying, my 2-year-old is stopping every single day and listening to you. We don't know what it is about your voice, but it's so calming and soothing. There's this piece that comes in, it's like letter after letter after. I did this for 15 years. There's stacks of letters. I never told anybody about what I was doing because I didn't know whether it would work. And if I didn't know whether it was Yogananda and Pantagali say, yeah, it'll work. I'm like, I don't know, maybe it'll work. And so I'm trying to make it work. And my purpose, that was really your question. My purpose is to free other voices. I want to show people the light inside of them that they are, let them find that and then find their way because of that. But I also want as many near-death experiencers, and there's tens of millions of us because of cardiac care primarily.
Right, exactly that. Now they can be resuscitated, yes.
And we're like a 5% of the American population. We're 10 to 20 million people. And nobody, as mysticism, and NDE is a type of mystical experience. It's very similar to union experiences. It overlaps with union experiences and other mystical experiences in literature. And it's just repressed. Like I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want anybody to think I was insane. I told my wife and 2 friends, and that got me into trouble. And so finally I came out of the closet after this big, huge embezzlement in the church I was working in, and all this terrible stuff that happened to me because of that. And in the end, I felt safe enough to tell people that I wasn't a believer, and that's why I was able to.
God!
Wow! From the pulpit, and that's why I was able
on the
to
pulpit.
That's why I was able to deal with all their BS for 11 years, where they tried to destroy me personally, professionally.
Oh my God! Everybody must have really paying attention to that.
They were riveted, and
they're like, "What?"
And because at the end, it was really, really bad. We were statewide news more than once, and they really tried to destroy me. There's people that were embezzling, and they were powerful people. I live in a resort town where wealthy people retire with big egos and wads of cash.
So basically you like blew the lid off the.
I did. And not only in the church, but it turns out that they were holding power at all of the nonprofits in town too. The library was poisoned. The land trust was poisoned. The YMCA was poisoned with their presence. And it totally blew the lid off of it. The water company, everything. It was.
So were you like a whistleblower kind of person on the way out?
I was a whistleblower kind of person, and they beat the crap out of me in the process of trying to prevent me. And in the end, after the deacons came up to me, so the thing about nonprofits, and I learned a lot about how nonprofits run. I ran $1 million nonprofit afterwards, and so a nonprofit has bylaws, and the bylaws are binding because they are under state law. And if you break the bylaws, you're breaking state law. Right. And so in our bylaws of the church, the deacons could never meet without the minister, period. Breaking the law.
Okay.
And so I walk into church this Sunday morning after this is all over. We prosecuted this person. All the bad people have left the church. The whole town is like, whew,
okay.
And I walk into church and all the deacons are there. I'm like, and suddenly I'm like, oh, they're back at it again. And I walk by and I kind of sidelong glance at them, and I go up to the pulpit, and one of them comes up and she's like, and it's one of the women I trusted the whole time, and she trusted me. And she was on my search committee, and she says to me, so we want to apologize to you because they really tried to destroy me. I mean, like defrock me, ruin me publicly. It was bad.
Wow.
And they had whisper campaigns, and the whole church had turned against me, and half the town was against me. It was really bad. And we wanted to apologize for what we did to you. You must have had a lot of faith to put up with us. And I thought, F no, I don't have any faith at all. And I thought to myself, maybe they trust me enough now that I can tell them the truth. And so I climbed into the pulpit that morning, and I took my sermon, and as it was in those days, I would print it on paper in a 36 font. So it was like 25 pages, but it really wasn't. And I took the whole thing, and I stood up, and I was always a bit of a dramatic person. And I stood up in the pulpit, and I said, "This is my sermon. I'm not going to preach it today." And I just tossed it, and like papers float and scatter. And I said, "I got something to tell you today." And it's really hard for me to say this because I've only told my wife and two of my friends, and it got me in trouble when I told them. And I need to tell you today because of what you said to me about my faith. And I told the story for the first time ever publicly, and to a hushed house.
I bet I was going to say you could have heard a pin drop, I'm sure.
And I told the entire thing, and they understood then that I never worked for them. Right. One of the reasons I could do this, what I did, is because I didn't work for them. They paid my check. That's it. I work for the divine. I have worked for the divine since I came back. And I knew that it was my job since I was a kid. And so I was always like, during this entire process, the four couples that were behind, that were protecting themselves from their own previous embezzlement in the church that they had done in the previous decade, were protecting the current embezzler. And one of these four people is still in jail, in prison.
So that sounds like a long-term kind of thing.
This is a long-term poison, decades.
Wow.
And so I was a disruptor from the very first trustees meeting when I said, "What's up with all the missing money?" And they freaked out. It was like spittle in my face.
An icebreaker.
Oh my God. It was paper scattered. People stood up. They were shouting and screaming, and people pointing at me. And what do you know? That
should have been your first sign there.
I resigned. I resigned in 9 weeks. I sent a letter of resignation, and there was a certain cohort of good people in the church who said, "We know there's a problem. We know it's not your fault, but we need you to stay here, if you will, to help us find out what it is." And so then 9 weeks later, I resigned for the second time because it got even worse. And I could tell you why that happened. And they're like, "No, please, please stay with us." And so there was like a dozen people in the church who were my allies. I wasn't alone, but I was definitely the point person. And so after I told this story to the congregation, and why I am not a person of faith or belief, but I am a knower of the divine, and that's what gave me the power to do everything I did in this time. And it wasn't just the embezzlement. I did a huge amount of social services. There was somebody, and I don't know who this person was, who gave me $10,000 a year in a restricted fund to help the poor.
Oh, like an anonymous donor kind of thing?
For a decade. And because I helped the poor. I helped the indigent. I helped roofs on houses, got people's cars when they couldn't get to work, fixing this and trying to get this place. So I trusted them, that they trusted me, and I told them the truth. And within a week, 6 people in town, 3 of whom I knew, came up to me and said, "Me too." And I haven't been able to talk about it. And I got dragged back. They all got dragged back. None of them wanted to come back. They all got pulled back, and it messed them up terribly. And I then got recruited to television, and ended up with this TV show for 15 years. And I kind of poked around with this. And then I was working in New York. There was a Hallmark Channel had an offshoot called Faith and Values Media with the National Council of Churches. And I got involved in this national level of media, and I was meeting with all these heads of media production for all the major denominations, all the major offices. And I was like in New York all the time working with these people. And they started
Okay.
giving me tons of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce material for them. And so
Okay.
one night we're all down, and this was up on 121st Street in the God Box, if there's any New Yorkers in your crowd, and near the cathedral. And we're somewhere downtown at dinner. And we're all drinking. We're all having. I'm not a drinker, but if I have too many drinks, I start to talk. And so I'm sitting, and there's like 15 people at the table, and I'm in the middle, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I died." And they're all like silence, and they're like, "Tell us the story." So I told them the story, and then they said, "Look, we'll produce your book trailer now
Okay.
if you promise to write this book."
All right.
And so they did. They produced a book trailer before my book was even written, and I wrote the book. And scary, I'll tell you. I'm not afraid of dying at all,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a little nerve-wracking when my writing was going to be critiqued.
Well, I bet. Yeah, sure.
And so I came out with this book, and it became it worked for me. It worked for everybody, and now I died again in 2015 of a heart attack
I
after
was gonna.
after running 5K the day before.
Hey.
And after that, the TV station, while I was in the hospital, a new corporation bought the TV station and canceled my show. And they
Wow.
gave me 18 months to close it down, and because they were so good to us for 91 years, I was the fifth guy at the helm of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I kept it a secret because I'm very good at keeping secrets. I
Okay.
kept it a secret from the audience and from everybody as we closed it down. But in this process, every single time I die or have a mystical experience, my personality gets shattered and I get reassembled. I'm still me, but
Right.
I'm also different. And so after the second death, I'm all in. I chose to come back a second time, this time for my granddaughter, who
Okay.
had, which is another complicated story. But I came back all in. And
All
part of my
right.
being all in is to try to help other near-death experiences raise their voices privately and in the public square so that we
Mm-hmm.
can normalize mystical experiences, or what people commonly call spiritually transformative experiences, so that we can talk about these things and not fear for our jobs or for our
Sure.
family relationships. And maybe then have a capacity, because we are so many of us, tens of millions of us, maybe we can be an influence, a nudger in the world.
Right. As far as, let
The
me ask you,
future of humanity.
what would, considering everything that you had, and it's funny when you said I didn't tell that guy was out there because he was an atheist. Like, in other words, at that point, if I try to explain this, what happened, he's going to say, "Yeah, that was the hypothermia,
He's going to say you're an
affecting your
idiot.
brain."
You're an
Right.
idiot. That was nothing.
Yeah, that was like, yeah, that was your brain, whatever, doing its thing, and it just like flipped out, and you thought, you know.
Yeah.
So, have you had the? I'm sure you've run across atheists,
Oh,
or
some of my
agnostics,
best
or
friends are atheists. So
yeah.
the year before this happened, I went on a 100-mile hike on the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts in March in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy I was with, who ended up as a professor of anthropology at University of Texas, and the guy who is the on-site forensic guy with a long ponytail for the Texas Rangers. So it's like
Okay.
this very interesting person. Anyway, he's still an atheist, and he's still my
Uh-huh.
friend.
Sure.
And because I'm not a believer. I don't need anybody to believe me. I kept my secret, not because I needed people. I was afraid people weren't going to believe me, but because I thought they were going to think I was crazy. And
Right.
I needed my profession and to
Sure.
earn a living. I had a family. I couldn't risk that.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to risk my relationships. I could live as a closeted mystic,
Mhm.
living acts of kindness and
Right.
compassion, without ever telling anybody. And
Right.
so I lied on my ecclesiastical council before I got ordained. I lied and
Well,
said I was a believer.
you know what? But then at the same time, I'm going to say because of that lie, you yourself said, I was given money. In other words, I
Oh,
was to help others. How's that?
immensely, immensely. And so after all of this happened, and there were a lot of other things. I have a bazillion stories. I've been shot at. Someone tried to kill me. I've been held at gunpoint. I've been threatened. I helped take down a murderer. It's like I'm always, and my
Okay.
poor wife. This is all because I'm in this clergy position and I'm able to do these things. And
Okay.
so my poor wife was suffering with the drama of it. It's always, my life was
Okay.
endangered. I can't
She
tell you
must have
how
been
many
very
times.
worried.
All the time. It's like being married to a cop.
Yeah.
And then when I went into television, all of that calmed down. I was no longer in the front line anymore.
She must have thought, okay, never again. No more. No more church stuff. All right.
Yeah. And she was never really, she was a person of belief and faith, but never in a standard sort of way. She's a spiritual person
Sure.
who tolerated, because she doesn't understand me. The only people that understand are the people who had something similar happen to them. And it's because, and I can't explain it to people. I try. My whole life is about communication. Like on my LinkedIn page, the thing that I do is communication. I'm a communicator. That's the bottom line of what I do. But nobody, unless it's happened to you, it's sort of like being a parent. You can read all the books about parenting you want. You can even be around babies and kids, but you never know what it is until that happens to you.
No. Yeah. That's one of those experiences. Everybody will tell you their story. You never get it till you're there. That's it.
And that's what this is like. And so I was alone in my world, with only my books and the ancient dead dusty people to be my peers, until I went to the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And once I started working with them, I found my peer group. And then I realized I came out of the closet as a near-death experiencer, but really I'm a mystic. I've been having mystical experiences all my life.
I was going to say, before you had your near-death experience, you were already having these out-of-body things.
But it was safer to come out as a near-death experiencer in the early 2000s than it was to come out as a mystic.
Yes.
So now I'm trying to come out as a mystic because I got nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose. I mean, I need to earn a living, and I could lose that. I could lose my house. But in terms of my eternal nature, I know. I live knowing every day I'm not from here. And every day I see light inside of everything. Everything here is crude for me. I know that I am not myself. And I know my eternal nature every moment of my life. And it's normalized for me. So I live ready to die all the time.
I was going to say, it almost sounds like, when somebody is homesick, like I'm here, but I really, really want to be over there because that's home, but I'll just stick it out here because
I'm sticking it out because I know my time's coming.
Well, it comes to everybody, doesn't it?
It does. Nobody gets out of here alive. So
yeah, it's like that's it. Peter, let me tell you, when you were telling me that story about the thing on the mountain, I was like, oh my God, what does he do? Does he fall off? How does he get out of that? It was like, and then that thing that you said that after you come back out of this rope finally disentangles itself, whatever.
It was either a miracle or the way I fell that last time, or maybe both. I don't know.
All right,
but it just pulled free.
Or it was like, okay, how much of this was
the angel let go? Oh, he's back. Huh?
Hey, yeah, no, okay, he's back. Yeah, let it go. All right, we did that. That's incredible, isn't it? Are you going to? Well, let me ask you something. The books that you've written, does any of them include that story or what happened there?
It does. The second book is an international bestseller called Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. And that's the one that's been optioned for a film. My first book is a collection of my TV stories, also a bestseller. And my third book, the movie was optioned. The book was optioned contingent upon me writing a third book. So
So they want like already like a sequel kind of thing,
right. So
ready in the wings.
the third book is now, after writing, and they've changed my writing style. It's been a long process. The second book, The Heaven is Beautiful, is act 2 of a 3-act screenplay, and they needed act 1 and act 3
Okay.
with a cliffhanger ending. True, of course, everything is going to about my life. It's
Right.
real. So I'm closing in on the end of writing the 5 chapters that they need to make this movie. At which point I'll go to my new literary agent. I'm with a new literary agency, thank God. And my last one was great, but this is so much better.
Okay.
And try to get this book out in the next year if I can.
Okay.
Finish writing. I have 20 chapters to write, and then hopefully I expect it will precede the movie, because movies take a long time. And then either it'll be a movie, hopefully with a sequel, that's what they're planning, or
Okay.
it'll be a 3-season series, which is the option that they're giving, that they gave themselves in the new contract. That I just
Interesting.
signed.
And you know why? Because I'm sure, well, obviously you do know, because if you worked once, sometimes you look at these series from the 90s and they had like 20 episodes in a season. And nowadays, even when they do series, the seasons are very short. As far as if you get 6 episodes,
13 to 14 usually. No, that was what you were saying. So
right. No,
sometimes there's
I'm
6
just
and
saying
8.
it seems like now, what episodes, if you want to call them episodes or whatever, it's like the seasons are very short, like the storyline.
Yeah.
Before, you watch shows from the 90s and 80s and you would have like 20 episodes in a season.
Money.
And now it's like, okay, that's it. What happened? I'm waiting. I want to binge on this.
It's too expensive.
They cut you off.
It's really expensive. It's when I worked in television, like a local TV station.
Right.
News Center, Maine is where my office was. We were not 501c3 nonprofit sistered in. So I was inside the corporation all the time, and I was working in New York with people in Bravo and Hallmark Channel and a bunch of other stations, other networks. It's really expensive. I couldn't believe how expensive it is to make the 2-minute shorts that we would make. 2-minute shorts would cost $5,000 each.
Wow.
Yeah, like,
and that's 2 minutes.
Mind-blowingly expensive.
Okay.
And the TV station, it was folded into their production costs. But when I was working in New York, they were giving me, I was writing grants. They weren't giving me the money. I was writing grants to them, and they give me hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a series of videos. But I get $100,000 and produce, I don't know, I can't remember the numbers. It's too long ago now, but a bunch of productions that were like $3,000 to $5,000 each. Oh my God.
Right. I know what you're saying as far as a cost comparison.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy because there's so many people involved and so much work, and so that's why I think that seasons are shorter. That's my best guess. Is just so freaking expensive.
I'm always complaining about that because it's like, I'm ready. That's it. What do you mean? I gotta wait for the next season? Are you kidding me?
Right. Exactly.
I get all upset about that stuff.
Yep. And then I've been waiting, and then I was watching this one show, waiting for the next season, and then it got canceled.
Right, and that happens too. All of a sudden, you're like, "What do you mean? This is a great show. Why did they do that?" And then you get the other ones. We're going off. It's like, okay, you guys, you needed to have ended this a long time ago. You don't know where to go with this story anymore. I don't know. I'm sure you've run across those storylines where it's like, rest in peace, let it go. That's it, no more. Like
it's over.
Kind of deal. Peter, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. So you've got basically from what you're telling me, you're working on a writing project. Okay.
And I have a YouTube channel.
And I was going to say, you have a YouTube channel also. What's your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is
listeners?
My name, Peter Panagore, at Peter Panagore, but I do this thing called Not Church Mysticism.
I saw that.
I'm a storyteller, but I'm also a scholar. And so I've been working through the Gospel of Thomas, but in these days I'm working through this book called the Peshitta, and the Peshitta is a heretical text from the Syriac tradition of Christianity that was written in Aramaic and is close to the language that Jesus spoke and predates beliefs, so scholars believe, predates the Koine Greek texts. And in translation, He's
Uh-huh.
super mystical, like
Okay.
mind-blowingly mystical. Like you
Okay.
mistake him for Lao Tzu when he's talking. And
All right.
so I do this deconstruction thing, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help people break away from their mind box
Right.
of Christianity, but also I'm trying to work very deeply in mysticism. So I pull in the Upanishads and I pull in the Vedas, and I show this cross current that
Okay.
runs through all of these. And so I've got this show, and it's not church, and then I run a thing called Mystic Tea Salon, which
Mm-hmm.
is a community of near-death experiencers and mystical experiencers who have felt repressed because they
Okay.
can't talk about what happened to them anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so we meet on Zoom. We've got usually 45 people. We've been meeting for 3 years. We probably got 70 or 80 people all together that come and go.
Okay.
But it is humility, compassion, and kindness are our rules. And you talk through
Okay.
experience. It's a place to talk. And I do counseling. I specialize in helping people integrate
Mm-hmm.
their mystical and near-death experiences because it takes a decade. It takes a long
I
time.
can imagine, depending, I guess, on the circumstances of what happened. I imagine it's got to take some people longer than others to square it in their heads, or like
Yeah. Well, you're living in a
whatever.
different world. You come back to a different planet. You're a different person in a different world, and nobody sees you differently. You
Right.
look the same, you sound the same, you act, well, you might not act the same. Actually,
Right.
in marriages, a high percentage, I don't know what the figure is off the top of my head, a high percentage of near-death experiences that happen in marriages end up in divorce.
Yes,
Way
I've heard of
big.
that. I've heard of that. Yes.
Yep.
That they come back so, and then
So
not
different.
changed in a bad way,
No,
but
just totally different.
just different, where maybe even that other person starts feeling like, hey, you're not the person I married, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
you're wigging me out here.
exactly. That's right. You're not the person I married.
Right. But they don't, but it's, see, for the person that didn't have the experience, it's a tough thing.
Oh, it's a
Except,
terrible
like,
thing.
yeah, like, I
It
know
is.
you, yeah, it's a very difficult thing. Again, Peter, thank you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you, and I want to wish you the best of luck on all your projects.
Thanks, Marlene. And thanks for having me here. And thanks, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure, and take care.
Peace and love.
Namaste. Wow. That story, what, call me a wimp, call me a coward, but climbing on an ice within caves, nope. And you know what? Not now at my age, and not ever. You know what? That's never been my, no, that really, it's never been my thing. I don't know. Some people call that, the adrenaline junkies, where it's like, I believe it or not, I've slingshot on, now that I think about it, it's like on those bungee cords, I've slingshotted on bungee cords, some of the stuff that you could say, Marlene, this, that people get their brains bashed out. I've done a couple of things that, thinking back, I was like, huh. But you know what? I've never really been claustrophobic, but then when I think about it, this could fit into, but that thing about going into caves and all that, I was like, no, not my, no. And by the way, I'm going to be climbing on ice. Hell no. No. I mean, it's like so many things can go wrong. How's this? There's scenarios where things go wrong. It's like, it's a pain. It's a bother. It's like, wow, you're going to cost you money. But these are situations where things go wrong. You end up dead or really hurt. Nah. Thanks, but no thanks. I'll pass on that. I'll always be the observer going, man, they're crazy. When it comes to stuff like that, I'm into self-preservation big time. And, and I know that a lot of people will say, you know what, there's people that do that like a lifetime. As a matter of fact, the other day I was reading an article about all these people that have died, like going up to Everest, all these people that have, from the early explorers, obviously, but even modern times, all these people that have died, and sometimes even the Sherpas have died, rescue parties have died. I mean, and some of these bodies are never recovered, or sometimes they're recovered years later, depending, or sometimes they know they're dead because they didn't come down. But a lot of people, and I hear about these people going, "Oh, I'm going to go to Everest. I'm going to do the Everest experience." I'm like, no, no. Plus, Marlene is not ice and snow. Not my thing. Not my thing. When it's really hot, I'm not happy. But the ice and snow thing, no, nope. That is not my thing. I don't see myself having any. When I see these some of these survival shows, and these people that are climbing, and you see them sitting in the snow in these little tents, and this wind is blowing, and this tent is going, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I missing here? What is fun about this scenario? And they're kind of and then maybe they've got a little fire or something going on. Like, I mean, you could tell they're like, I'm like, man, what, you need to go about this? This has got to be a mission. And it's like, where's the fun in this? I missed this. Yeah. And I know everybody's different as far as what's considered fun or adventurous, but the other, as a matter of fact, oh my God, I can't remember his name right now. What was it? I read yesterday. Oh, Marlene, that there was a famous surfer that died because Mikala Jones. Okay, Mikala Jones. Okay, he had an accident where it was always has had what do you call it? Like a weird accident where he cut his femoral artery. All right, and 44-year-old guy. And point being, this was an experienced surfer. All right, this was not like somebody that didn't know what he was doing. And the surfboard fin. Think about that. The surfboard fin cut his femoral artery, and of course, that's you bleed out very quickly. And here's another one that died like weird. Sometimes it's been many years. Steve Irwin, the cracky whatever, the animal guy out in Australia, when he got killed with that, what was it? He got stabbed through the heart with that ray. I mean, no. I like life too much. Thanks. Anyway, guys, I hope you like the show. I have a lot of interesting people coming on. Again, don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter. All right. And of course, links to everything is on miamighostchronicles.com, mpellicer.com. Don't forget supernaturalstorytime.com. If you like scary stories, I have that podcast series. I have Nightshade Diary, which is the classic horror, mystery, adventure stories. As a matter of fact, I just finished doing one for H.P. Lovecraft, because this is the thing. For example, H.P. Lovecraft, there's certain stories that are very well known, the Cthulhu mythos stories, etc. But he wrote a lot of other stories that never really gained prominence, but they were there and they're really good. And, I do that on Nightshade Diary. So again, guys, if you want to get links to videos, podcasts, no commercial interruption, yada, 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 go there and you will find it. So until next time, thank you so much for coming around every week. You are all wonderful. Take care.